Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Simon, and in this video I'm going to cover everything that you need to know about your first test in the UNIX Administration course at Mohawk College. Now, I already made a video regarding the first test, and the reason why I'm making a new video is simply because in the first video I did not have access to eLearn. It was down. So there were a lot of things that I was doing, and I was saying, just trust me on this. It's in your practice labs, and you'll find the commands here. And unfortunately, I couldn't actually show you. So I know that there's a lot of students that will say, well, can you show me? Because I don't know where to go. I know that some of you haven't even seen the first video, so that's okay. And I thought, you know what, just in case eLearn was down the entire weekend, I was going to put the first video up so you had something that you can refer to and study. But now that eLearn's back up, I thought, you know what, I'll just make another video, and that way, hopefully, this is going to be a lot more clear than the first video. And yeah, that's pretty much why I'm doing a second video, but I'm going to leave both of them up so you can watch whatever you want to watch and whatever makes sense to you. And hopefully, you're going to get benefit from any of these videos. So I'm going to just reiterate everything I did in the first video, but now I'm going to be able to show you things that I was referencing in the first video, okay? So the very first thing I did in the video was just give you some tips and tricks, and then I went through the practice lab, or sorry, the practice test, rather. I went through the practice test that you were given, and what was really awesome was that the practice test that you were given is the exact same practice test that I was given when I took this course last winter. So that means that your test is probably going to be very, very similar to what I took, so I can give you some really awesome general advice. It's not going to be the exact same. I'm pretty confident that I was talking to a friend of mine that took the course before I had taken the course, and we didn't have the exact same test. So unfortunately, I can't give you any definitive answers. I can't help you cheat, but I am going to give you some really awesome information that's going to help you prepare for that test, and hopefully you walk away from the test with an amazing mark. So let's get into the actual tips, and then we will go through this practice test. So the very first tip I said was that if you're concerned about what the test is going to look like, it looks exactly like this practice test in terms of the formatting anyway. You'll get this little blurb up here that says your actual test. You're going to get prerequisites. It's going to give you all this information you're not going to read. The grading section is going to tell you stuff that you're probably not going to read, and then you're going to make sure that you import a fresh clean copy of the W01 and S01 virtual machines. Then you get all of your tasks that you have to do, and at the very end you'll get one final task, which is basically run the grading script and upload it to the Dropbox. So it looks exactly like this, and this looks exactly like a graded lab. So it should be very familiar to you, and you shouldn't have to panic at all. You shouldn't look at this and think, oh my god, I don't know what I'm doing. It should be very, very familiar, and you should feel very, very comfortable just looking at this. The second tip that I gave you is that if you're planning to just study the practice test, it will prepare you for 80% of the actual test. So you'll probably still get a really good mark. The only problem is that the practice test doesn't include everything that you'll get on your actual test. So if you're a perfectionist and you want that 100%, and you want to feel completely prepared for the test itself, make sure that you're not only studying the practice test, but you're studying the practice labs as well. And if you have time, try to challenge yourself with the graded labs again as well, because there's always benefit in looking at some of them. And again, I don't know if there's going to be something that was on a graded lab and not a practice lab that will be on your test. For me, I don't think it was. I think everything I had in my test was in the practice test or the practice labs. But again, I can't tell you for sure because I don't know what kind of test you're going to get. So make sure you're going through everything as much as possible. I know it's a lot to go through, but if you have to, and you can only select, 2 out of the 3 things you're going to do, definitely do the practice test to, prepare yourself for 80% of the actual test, and then go through the practice labs. And there's a benefit to going through the practice labs, and I'll tell you what that is in tip number 3. Tip number 3 is that you should not memorize any commands. There's no point. It's an open book test, and you don't want to overwhelm yourself. There's way too many commands out there. So don't memorize commands. If you know them just because you know them and you've done them enough, awesome. But don't go out of your way to memorize commands. What you should really do is get yourself familiar with the actual content of each lab and what each lab is trying to teach you. So let's go to the content, and the labs that you have to make sure that you familiarize yourself with for this particular test is Lab Tour, Users and Groups, System Identity and Basic Networking, File Systems and Disks, Installing and Updating Software, and System Startup and Services. So there's 6. Now, are all these labs going to be on your test? They may, even though your practice test doesn't show all of them, there is a possibility that you will have all of these on your test. In terms of my test, I did not. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I'm pretty sure there was one of them that wasn't, but I can't tell you not to study that because you might get that on your test. So definitely study all the practice labs. And like I said, you don't want to get yourself to a point where you've memorized all the commands because that's just too much. But if you can make sure that you know what each lab was trying to teach you, you're going to save a lot of time in your test because it's an open book test, which means at any point in time you can go into eLearn and find the command that you're looking for. So if you're on your test, you're looking at it and it tells you to do something. For example, let's go right here. If it says create 2 new users, you should know that the one lab that taught you how to create users was users and groups. So you'll be able to go to users and groups. So I'm going to click on it, go to the actual practice lab, click on it, and then the practice lab will eventually load and you'll be able to find the command that you're looking for. So if I just scroll down, I'll see something that says simple user create, and there we go. That is the command I'm looking for. So that's what you really want to do. Where students struggle with this test is that they run out of time because you have an hour and a half to 2 hours to complete this. And if they don't know where to find the commands that they're looking for, they're just going to be clicking on practice lab after practice lab, grade lab after grade lab, even going to Google and trying to find the answers, and they can't find it. And they're wasting a lot of time doing that. So don't memorize commands. Memorize basically the content of each lab and what they're trying to teach you. That way, when you see something that tells you to do something, you'll say, I know I learned that in this practice lab, so I'll go there and find the command that I need. Okay, so that was another tip that I gave you. And I also said this. Here's another tip, I guess, or maybe it's part of the same thing. Look at the title of what you're going to be doing in the sections, because here it says users and groups, and that's the exact same name as this lab that I just showed you. It is users and groups. Now, not every title is going to be as obvious as that. Right here we have something that says add a disk. We don't have a lab called add a disk, but if we go back to all these sections, let me just go back to content, we will see that we do have something called file systems and disks. And if you've done the practice lab, you'll probably say to yourself, I know that I learned how to do all this in the file systems and disk practice lab, so you'll be able to go to this practice lab and find the answers that you're looking for. So when you look at your actual practice test or you're looking at your actual test, look to see the clues, because typically in the title, it's going to give you an idea of where you need to look. So that is another tip. The final tip that I can give you before we actually get into the practice test and I show you how to complete it is this. There's a section right here that says install MySQL. We've never learned how to install MySQL in any of the practice labs or any of the actual grade labs. And if you remember how to install anything, there's an install command that we're going to use. And the install command isn't as simple as saying install MySQL. For example, in a practice lab or in a grade lab, we had to install the Apache web server. And you couldn't just say the command to install and then Apache web server. Apache web server had a specific name that we had to refer to it as, and that was HTTPD. And in this practice lab, we're getting something called MySQL, but can we just type in the install command MySQL? Well, you don't necessarily know. But thankfully, if something comes out to you that seems to be from left field, it just comes out and you're like, I have no idea, we've never done this before, just keep reading, because a lot of times they will tell you. For example, it says hint MySQL-server. So when you put your install command in, you're going to be putting this in instead of MySQL. If you go to configure the MySQL database to start automatically at boot, you're going to be looking for probably MySQL-server in the actual list of all services in the virtual machine that you've created, but you might not find it, but you're going to find it probably under MySQL-D. So if there is something that comes out of left field, just keep reading and it should tell you. If it doesn't tell you, that means you've already learned it. So like example, the Apache web server, if it just says install Apache web server, you've already learned how to do it, so it might not give you the hint. So look at your practice labs or your grade labs and you'll find the answers. But I can tell you from my experience on the test, nothing surprised me in terms of coming out of left field. Nothing was asked of me that we hadn't done before as far as I know. And I think if there was anything, it at least taught us. So will the test be easy? No, it's going to be challenging, but like I said, doing the practice test is going to prepare you for 80% of it, and then if you've done the practice labs enough, the stuff that will come out that seems challenging, like, oh, I didn't, like, do this on the practice test, you'll be able to say, you know what, I do remember doing that in this practice lab, so I'll go there, and that way I know how to do it. Okay, so that is pretty much the tips. If you have any other questions or comments, please leave them in the YouTube video, and I will get back to you as soon as I can, so that way you get the answers that you're looking for before your test. But now we can actually do the practice test, and I can actually show you where to get these answers from. So we're going to start at part A, where it says import the appliance. I know you're going to be using Mohawk College computers to do this, so unfortunately, you're going to be restricted in terms of the specs you can use for your settings. But don't worry about that right now. Just go to VirtualBox. If you happen to have the W1 and SO1 virtual machines there from a previous lab, get rid of them because we want fresh copies of the actual virtual machines, okay? So just right click on them, click remove, click delete all files, go up to File, Import Appliance, and find the OVA file in your computer, or on your computer I should say. So here's mine, open it up, click on next, and this is what I was talking about. In terms of the settings, every video that I've ever given to you basically said that use whatever settings you like, but now that you're on Mohawk College computers, you really are limited. They don't have the greatest specs. But this is what I can tell you. For this test, we're doing mostly everything on SO1, and I never change SO1 settings because there's really no need to. It's a core install. It's not a graphical user interface or anything like that. So you can leave these the way it is, and that'll be fine. In terms of W1, that virtual machine is a graphical user interface. We will use it to basically download run the script that we have to run, send it over to SO1 so they can actually run it, and then they'll send it back to W1 to upload it onto Dropbox. So it's up to you. You probably won't notice much difference for this test, but I would say if you want to, increase the CPU from 1 to 2 and the RAM from 1024 to 2048. Alright, so now that I've done that, I'm going to click import. And we will see that it's going to take its time to import. It may take a little bit longer for you, so I would definitely make sure that you do this before the test actually begins. So get to class early because this can take a long time in itself. Once it does import, start each of the virtual machines one by one. That way you're not slowing down your machine, and you definitely don't want your machine to be slowed down during the test. So if you had a great computer and you've used your computer to do all of your labs and you're used to doing both of them at the same time, for your test, definitely don't do that. Just do it one at a time. Just, play it safe. This is a test. It's worth a lot of marks. You don't want to mess up everything by trying to, slow down your system. So I'm just going to put that down here for now. And while this is loading, I also have to tell you that you're going to need another file. So we had the OVA file that we obviously need, but we need the DVD ISO image. And if you remember the installing and upgrading software lab, you will remember that SO1 doesn't have an internet connection. So what that means is that you are going to need to find the files that you're going to have to download and install somewhere. And where you're going to find those files is in the DVD ISO. So when you saw that section in this practice test, it said install MySQL. We're going to install it from the DVD ISO, and whatever the test asks you to install, it's going to ask you to install it from the DVD ISO. Okay, so I'm going to minimize this, but just make sure you have this DVD ISO ready, otherwise you're not going to do well on the test. So SO1 is ready, but we're just going to make sure that W01 is ready as well, even though we're not going to use it for most of the test. So I'm going to, I'll minimize this for now. We'll bring this guy up here. And if you want, while it's loading, you can log into SO1 with root. And the password is admin pass, which you should already know. And there we go. So we are in SO1. We're just waiting for W01 to load, and then we'll log in. And then we can start with part B, which is users and groups. And it says, in this section, you'll need to add 2 new users to SO1, Sally and Sue. Sally and Sue are twins and as such like to share files. We don't have to worry about sharing files just yet in this section, but that will come into play later on. But the first thing it wants us to do is create 2 new users on SO1 with usernames of Sally and Sue. So if your WO1 machine has loaded, feel free to log in with the password user pass, and we're logging in as Alice, and then we can leave this the way it is. We're just going to be working on SO1 from now on until the very end. So now I'm on SO1, and we're going to create 2 new users on SO1 with usernames of Sally and Sue. So again, you're going to want to know what practice lab this comes from, and I've already told you that in part B, the name users and groups is actually the same name as the practice lab you're going to refer to. So let's open up the users and groups and open up the practice lab, because remember, the practice lab is going to give you the commands that you need. The grade labs probably won't. For the most part, it won't. So when you're looking for commands, go to the practice labs only, and it helps you really make sure you know where you're going. So if I go down here, I see part B, simple user create, and I see this part where it says create an account for Caleb Dev, and it gives us the command. So it's going to say user add, the username. Then we have something that says -c for comment, and we can put in the full name. And then we have -m. Okay, so this is basically what we're going to be using. On your practice test, you'll notice that Sally and Sue don't have full names, so we don't even have to put that comment with the full name because there's no need. If you want to, you can put comment and just put Sally, and put comment and just put Sue, but there's really no need. Just remember, on your test, you might have to. On your test, you might have to put in the full name, but on the practice test, you won't have to. So that's kind of part of the 20% I said you won't be prepared for, is that you will, in the practice test, you're just going to put basically this: user add Sally -m, because that's all we need to in the practice test. But on your actual test, you might actually have to put user add Sally, then -c comment, maybe the full name, Sally Field, and then -m. So just be prepared for that. And when you look at your practice lab, just remember, when you see the full name, if you're like, well, what's the full name? Either don't put it in, or if you want to, just put in what you know. So you can say comment, Sally -m, whatever you'd like. In this case, there's no need to put a comment, in my opinion. So the practice lab only wants you to put a username of Sally in there. So you're going to say user add Sally -m and hit enter. So that's exactly what that is, just minus the -c in the full name. And like I told you, -c is comment, and that's the full name. Alright, so we're going to do the same thing for Sue now. So user add Sue -m. Enter. And now we are done with this part. So the next part says give both new users the initial password of Mohawk 1. And what's really awesome is that he's giving you the actual command that you need to use. And I know that's the actual command because if I go back into the users and groups practice lab, you can see the next section says, or the next part of part B says set his password, and says you're going to say password and the username. Alright, so let's do that. Password, and we'll start with Sally. So now it's going to ask you for a new password, and we want to put it as Mohawk 1, so type in Mohawk 1. And when you're ready, hit enter, but just remember that it's going to say bad password. So the reason why it's saying bad password is that, think of Windows. It wants you to have, a capital letter, small letters, a number. It wants you to make sure it's so many characters long. And in this case, Mohawk 1 didn't have capital, so it's not really meeting the security standards that Linux wants you to use. But we're root. So when we say Mohawk 1 again, which you can do, you can type in Mohawk 1 again, we're basically saying, listen, we're root, do as we say, and the system will comply. They'll say, okay. So just type in Mohawk 1 again, hit enter, and there we go. It updates successfully. So if you look, it even tells you that in the actual practice lab. It says, no, you'll be warned that the password is too simple, but you are root, so you can ignore this warning for now. Okay? Alright, so let's do the same thing for Sue now. So we're going to say password Sue, Mohawk 1. It's going to say bad password. We're going to say too bad, Mohawk 1. And we are done. Perfect. Okay, so let's go back to the practice test. It says now that we've completed this, we're going to force each user to change their password the next time they log on. So let's just clear this so that you can see very clearly what I'm going to do. In the users and groups practice lab that we're in, if we go down, we're going to see something that says, okay, password aging. So it's part C, password aging, because that's what we want to make sure is that they have to log in and change their password right away the first time they log in. And there's a bunch of stuff here, but what we're really looking for is this guy right here. And if you read it, it says, force the user to change his password the next time he logs in. This is useful when creating new users with temporary passwords. So we're going to use the command chage -d0 and the username. So -d basically says how many days left before the user has to change their password, and we're saying 0 to say there's no days left, they have to change it right now. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to say chage -d0 and then the name. So Sally and Sue. And there we go. We are done. We didn't get any errors, so there's no problem. Now when they log in for the first time, they're going to have to change their password. Okay, so what's the next step? We have one final step, and it says create a group named twins containing Sally and Sue. So this is kind of a two-parter, because first we have to create the group, and then we have to put Sally and Sue into the group. So the group name is going to be twins, and we're going to put Sally and Sue into twins. Okay, so let's go back to users and groups and find a section called groups. There we go. So here's the groups section, and the very first thing says create the athletes group, and here's the command to create athletes group. Well, we want twins, so we're going to say group add twins. So I'm going to do that right now. Group add twins. Very good. We didn't get an error, so that means it probably worked. So now we have to add each user to the twins group, right? So how we're going to do that is if we just go down, we get two options. And this is something I talked about in the first video. I like the first option the best because what it says is gpassword, which doesn't really make sense if you think about it. You're like, I don't understand what's called gpassword. But if you memorize that, the next parts are easy. Basically -a to add user to groups or group. So basically gpassword -a, the user, so in this case Caleb, and then the group, which is athletes. That to me makes sense. That's almost like talking naturally. Like I like to add this user to my group. The other one can be done, and if you like to do it, go ahead. It works the exact same way. It is user mod -a capital G, and then the group name, and then the user. The problem is it just doesn't sound as natural to say user mod AG, the group, and now the user. It just feels like it's kind of the reverse order. So for me, it's not what I go to naturally, but you can. It does the exact same thing. Just remember, if you mess up the letters, so if you put a capital A instead of a small a, or a small g instead of a capital G, that can mess up this whole thing. So you have to make sure that you have a small a and a capital G. But with gpassword, everything is small case, so that's another reason why I like that one instead. But I'll show you. I can do both of them just fine. gpassword -a, we're going to say Sally into twins, and that's perfect. I like it, and that's what I would do normally for Sue as well, but I'm just going to show you that the other one works as well. So user mod -a capital G, not athletes, sorry, twins, and then Sue. Hit enter. It works the exact same way. So now both of them are in there. Now you're going to say, wait a minute, adding user Sally to group twins came up, so we knew that worked, but user mod did not come up with anything. So how do I know it works? That's another reason why I know that, or that's another reason why I like gpassword -a over user mod, because user mod doesn't tell you that that happened, but I'll show you that it did actually work. If I go into switch user to Sue, now I'm Sue and I say ID, I can see my groups. I'm in the group Sue and I'm in the group twins. So it did actually work. And if you're like, well, let's look at Sally, we can see if I say ID, Sally's in her own group and Sally is also in twins. So it worked for both of them. But again, gpassword just makes the most sense because you get a message so you know it worked. It also just feels natural the way you're saying add Sally to twins. So do whatever you want. I'm not trying to necessarily convince you one way or another, but I do find that students will find the gpassword a lot easier. Okay, so we're done. We have completed part B. So we can now move on to part C. So part C says add a disk, and as I said to you, there is no actual practice lab that says add a disk, but we do have something called, let's go back here, file systems and disk, and this is where we'll want to go for the practice lab to find all the commands we need. And this is one that we definitely are going to want to look at because there's a lot to this. I mean, look at this whole section. In this case, what I told you in the last video I had, it says that we need to basically create a new LVM volume group. So when you look at this practice lab, there's a lot to it. But what you want to specifically look out for is something that says LVM. So when we go down here, it says add a disk classic partitioning. Well, that's not what we want. We want an LVM. So if you scroll down, you will see add a disk LVM. So this is the section you're going to want to basically follow almost to a T depending on the test. Your test might not say LVM. The test might be like, no, we want you to do classic partitioning. But LVM, there's more to it, so bank on that. If it was me, I would bank on probably having to do LVM over classic partitioning, but you never know. Your test might be classic partitioning, but in terms of this practice test, we're doing LVM. So don't worry about all this stuff up here. All you really need to work on is part D, add a disk LVM, and we can follow all of these steps. Okay? So let's start with the very first thing. It says add a 3 GB disk to SO1. We have to do this outside of the virtual machine. So we have to actually go into VirtualBox and add it. So what we're going to do first is shut down SO1. So we're going to say shut down -H now. Hit enter and it's going to shut down. Oh, I have to be root. I apologize. I'm going to exit. Shut down -H now. You shouldn't need to ever log into any of the users, by the way, on your test, but I just did just show you that, so you won't have that problem. But if you are ever in another user and you try to shut down, make sure you exit and get into root so you can shut down the virtual machine. So let's go into VirtualBox, and we are going to click on SO1 and go to settings. You're going to go to storage, and you are going to go to the controller SATA section, click on it, and click on the icon to the very right. It's a little hard disk with a plus on it. So click on that icon. It says adds hard disk. And then out of these options, you're going to create a new disk. So we're going to say create new disk. VDI is fine, so leave it as is and click next. Dynamically allocated is fine, so click next. And now you can call this disk whatever you want. That isn't going to be checked in the grading script, okay? So you can say Simon's VD 01, let's say. So Simon's virtual disk 01. And the only thing that we need to make sure we change is this 8 because he wants 3. So because he wants 3, this 8 has to change to a 3. And now we're good. And you can click create, and it doesn't take any time at all, so that's good. And say OK, and start SO1 back up. There we go. It'll just take some time. But what we're going to do is use the entire disk you just added to create a new LVM volume group named VGO1. So this is the part in the previous video where I couldn't reference this, and I really apologize because this is probably the most confusing for students, and this is one I definitely suggest just follow what is in eLearn because it just makes sense. And this is a really complicated one for a lot of students, so don't make it complicated for yourself. Just follow the steps. Log into SO1 with root. Sorry. Password is admin pass. And what we can do, I'm going to show you this. You don't have to do this. You can just assume it works, but I'm going to show you how we know that the virtual disk is added to this virtual machine. We are going to use a command called ll, and we're going to say /dev/sd and star or asterisk. And we can see a bunch of stuff that you may not understand, but that's okay. Basically, we have SDA, SDA1, SDA2, and then SDB. Basically, SDA is the first virtual disk for this virtual machine. So when the teacher, James Long, created these virtual machines, he obviously gave it a hard disk. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a system. You wouldn't have any of this, right? So he gave you a virtual disk, and the virtual disk was the first one. So it was considered SDA. So A is basically number 1. And he partitioned it. He has partition 1, partition 2. So SDA is what he created. But when we put our virtual disk in, it starts at SDB, B being 2. So on your test, you might get 2 or 3 of them. I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I don't even remember what I had to do, to be honest with you. So you might have SDB and an SDC if you have 2 of them. So just remember that SDA 1 and 2 is not the one that you added. The one that you added will start at SDB and go down if you add more to that, okay? So we are working with SDB. Okay, awesome. So let's clear this, and we're going to start to actually partition this. Okay, we're going to format SD. It says C here, but ours is B, and you saw that. So we're going to format SDB with a single partition. And I know it's a single partition because he doesn't tell us in here to have several partitions. It's just we're going to be using the entire disk. So we only need to create one partition. On your test, you might have 2 partitions, so be prepared for that. But it is also in the graded lab, I believe. I don't think it's in the practice lab, but it is in the graded lab where you learn how to do 2 partitions. So again, be prepared for something like that just in case. But in this case, for the practice test, we are just going to do one whole partition. So we are going to start actually right here. Okay, so we're just going to follow this almost to a T. The only difference will be this guy down here where it says 261. I'll show you why that's going to be different. But start with this command. Okay, we're going to say fdisk /dev/SDB. Ours is B. It says C here, but just remember ours is B. Hit enter. You're going to get a lot of text. You don't need to read it. All you need to know, where it says command, we are going to type in N for new. So we're going to say N. And then we have an option between E or P. So we're going to have to put in E or P. And we want partition. So we're going to say P, just like he says right here. So type in P and hit enter. And now it says partition number. We know we're only going to have one partition because we're using the whole thing. So we're going to say 1. And that's what they have here as well. So that works. Now we have something that says first cylinder, and that might be complicated to you. You might be like, I don't know what that means. Essentially, just think of the virtual disk as having cylinders, and you're going to have to figure out what is your starting point and what is your ending point. So in this case, we want the whole virtual machine, or sorry, the whole virtual disk for our storage, right? So if there's a cylinders 1, 2, and it says 391, we want the very first cylinder to be 1. We want the starting point to be the very first cylinder. So we're going to say 1 again. And 1 is the default, so go ahead and click 1. Now it says the last cylinder, which is the final point. So you're going to have the starting point to the final point, and everything in between we're going to be able to use as storage. So we said 1 is going to be our first cylinder, so that's the very starting point of the virtual disk. So we want the last cylinder to be the ending point, so we know that we have the entire virtual disk as our storage. And here it says 261, but that's because when we created this, we created it in the practice lab as a 2 GB disk, but in the actual test, or the practice test, we had a 3 GB disk. So our cylinders are going to be a little bit more. In this case, we can see we have 1 to 391. So our range is 1 to 391. So if we want the whole disk, we want the last cylinder to be 391. So that's what we're going to type in, 391, and hit enter. Now it's asking us to do another command, and what we have to do is we have to specify what this virtual disk is going to be used for. So we're going to change the type. So what we're going to do is type in T. Type T, hit enter, and now it's going to ask you to type the hex code. And it tells us right here we're going to use 8E. And you're going to be like, what does 8E mean? 8E is basically just saying that this is an LVM. Okay, and I can show you really quickly. You can type in L to see the list of codes, and there's tons of them. But if you look at 8E, which is right here, you can see it says Linux LVM. So that's the one we want to use, and it tells us that here. And remember, we're under the LVM section, so this is exactly what we want to use. If you're in the classic partitioning section, you'll see that we typed in 8.3, not 8E. And if you look at 8.3 here, it's just Linux. It's not Linux LVM. So in this case, we want the LVM, so it tells us 8E, and we can see in this list 8E is Linux LVM, so that's exactly what we want. So type in 8E and hit enter. And now all we have to do is type W to write. So we're going to say W, and now we have completed the partition. So that's all we have to do for this section. But remember, it wants us to create a volume group named VGO1, right? Use the entire disk you added to create a new volume group called VGO1. So we still have some more things to do. First, we have to write the LV formatting. So we're going to use this command, pvcreate /dev/SDB1. And you're going to be like, why B1? Well, if we do that same command I used before, ll/dev/sd star or asterisk, now we can see B has a partition to it. So now we have SDB1, and that's the one that we want to use to basically create our LVM volume. So what we're going to do, we'll clear this, is say pv create /dev/sdb1 and hit enter. And it's going to tell us it successfully created it. So that's perfect. So now we can create the new volume group. It's going to be VG create the name. So it says VG share here, but ours is going to be VG01 because that's what it tells us to do right here. And then we are going to put in dev SDB1. So I'll do that now. There we go. So it successfully created VG01. So that's great. So that's basically all we had to do for that first section. So we are now done these two. So we can move on here where it says create a 2 GB logical volume named dev VG01 lvol0. Okay. So once again, we're just following the steps. So the next thing we're going to do is do this. lv create dash capital L. That capital L is very important, because instead of 1G for 1 GB, we're going to change it to 2G. And the capital L tells us that we can basically label how much we want in something that we would understand, something that looks normal to us. So when we think of 2 GB, we think of 2G. So we're going to put in 2G. So make sure you put in that capital L. A small l is something else. Okay, so if you put a small l, that can not work. And it's because small l is designated for something else. And that actual small l is something that I think you used in your grade lab. The small l, you can actually use percentages instead of actual numbers. So anyways, in this case, we know we need 2 GB. So we're going to say lv create dash capital L 2G dash n for name. They called this catering, but in our case, we want to use this guy right here, lvol0. That's the name that we actually want to use, okay? And then it says VG share, and you remember that when we use VG share up here on the actual practice test, we used VG01. So just remember that. And I know that's confusing, but you got to get that down because that is going to get you that perfect mark, okay? So it's going to look like this, LV create. And then we're going to say capital L, 2G for 2 GB, small n for name, and our name is going to be lvol0. And then we're going to say VG01. Hit enter, and that got created. So that's perfect. You don't have to inspect your work if you're comfortable, but you can if you want. I'm just going to skip it because I know everything's working. We can go here, which is build a file system on catering, but let's look how we're supposed to do it, because MKFS means make a file system, -T means type, and then you're going to have this here, which says extension 4, but that could be something else. It could be extension 3. It could be a lot of different things. So you want to make sure you know what you're supposed to do from the actual test. And then you're going to have dev / instead of VG share, ours is VG01 / instead of catering, ours is lvol0. Okay. So if we go here, it says the next thing is to build an extension 4 file system. So we're going to actually use the exact same thing, but just look at your test, because your test might say extension 3 for whatever reason. But it does give us the full name, so at least you know that this is what you're going to be putting in. So I'm going to put that in right here. Make file system -T for type extension 4, and then /dev /VG01 /lvol0. Hit enter. And there we go. We didn't get any errors, so that looks really, really good. Again, I'm getting all this information from the same file systems and disk practice lab. I haven't changed it, so it's all right here for you. It's super simple. So under LVM, we just completed this guy. So now we have a bunch of other things it's asking us to do, and it's most likely what we're going to have to do on the practice test. So if we go down to the next thing, it says mount the new file system at Twins. This mount must occur automatically when SO1 is rebooted. So if we're going to mount the new file system at Twins, remember we have a group named Twins. This isn't the group, this is a folder, and we haven't created this folder yet, so we have to first create the folder, which is technically this step right here. We have to create the mount endpoint, so we have to create the directory, or folder as I call it. Alright, so let's clear this. I'm going to say make directory -p. We're going to say twins. So /twins, enter. Now the directory exists, so we can move on to the next thing. And this is where we can put the mounting point for this new logical volume we created into a file called fstab. I call it fstab, but it's actually fstab, like file system tab. So how you're going to do this, you're going to say vi /etc/fstab. Hit enter, and you're going to see a bunch of things that you probably don't need to worry about just yet in this course anyway. But you're going to hit I because we're going to insert a new line. Hit enter, and we've already created that directory, so this is the part we're at. We're going to be putting a line that looks like this. So the very first part, this guy right here, is basically the dev vgo1 lvol0. That's what you're going to be putting as the first part of the line right here. Okay, so do that right now. /dev /vgo1 /lvol0. Now the next part is going to be the folder that we created. So we call it our folder or directory twins. So the shared catering, you're going to change to twins. So make some spaces, twins, and that should be good. You don't have to make it perfectly line up. It doesn't matter. As long as there's a space there, that's all that matters. But I like to line them up because I have OCD. Alright, so the next part is going to say the extension that we used. So we used extension 4, so we're going to put that in. But remember, if you used extension 3, you'll put extension 3, and so on and so forth. So just remember that this section is basically the file system type that we used. In this case, we did use extension 4, so we're going to put that in as well. And then these guys, just keep it the same. Defaults just means just use the default in terms of when the system boots, what are you going to do? We want it to start automatically when it boots, so defaults is fine. Just leave that as, don't even think about it. Same thing with the numbers, just leave it as 0, 2. Basically what the numbers are doing are they are doing checks. They do checks on the system dump and some other things, so you don't have to really worry about that, but just put in 0, 2 because that's what the teacher wants you to do, and you don't have to worry about what it really means for your test. You just have to put it in. So when you're ready, hit escape, WQ to write and quit, and then you're done with that. And now we want to mount it. Okay, let me just make sure it says, yes, it says we have to mount it. So now that we've created twins, we've put it in the FS tab, so it automatically starts when we boot. You have to mount it, and there's a couple ways you can do it. Basically, you can either restart the virtual machine if you want, or you can type in mount /twins if you want. You can say mount /dev vgo1 /lvol0, or you can just simply say mount -a for mount all. Okay, so I'm going to clear that, and I'm just going to say mount -a. There we go. So I know that it's mounted because I can say df and hit enter, and we can see now twins is there. Okay. Alright, so now we've mounted it. It says Sue and Sally must have full access to twins. Other regular users must have no access. So what can we do to make sure Sally and Sue have full access and no one else has any access? Well, what we can do is make that twins folder part of a group. We can put it part of the twins group. Okay, so once we make it part of the twins group, then we can change the permissions and say only people in the twins group can access this. Okay, so what we're going to do is this. We are going, I'll clear this. We already have the directory, so we don't have to create the directory, but we're going to first change the ownership. So you're going to be like, well, where does it say that in here? It doesn't say that in here. It doesn't. We're actually going to go back into users and groups. See, this is where it's really beneficial to know where all of the actual commands are. If you get yourself very familiar with each of the practice labs, you'll be able to say, okay, if I have to change a directory so that the ownership is for the group's twins, I know that I learned that in users and groups. So you can quickly go there, go to the practice lab, and then find it. So if we scroll down, we're going to look for something where we can change the group ownership, and that's right here. It says create a directory in which they can place the files they want to share. And it's basically, if you went through this, it's basically referring to it wants to make sure that anyone in the athletes group can basically put whatever they want into this folder, but no one else can. So we already have this directory created. What we have to do now is do this, chown. We're going to say that root can still be the user that owns the folder, but the group that's going to own the folder is not athletes. In our case, it can be twins. And then we're just going to put the folder right there. So that's what we're going to do first. chown root twins / twins. Hit enter. So now root is the user that owns this folder or this directory, and twins is the group that owns this folder and directory as well. So now if I want to make sure that only people in twins can access this folder, what I'm going to do is the next part right here. It says chmod share athletes, and it has this number. Don't worry about the 2 yet. In this case, we don't have to worry about the 2, and I'll explain what the 2 does after. All you're going to do is a normal permission. So we're going to say chmod 770 so that the user, in this case the root, will have full access. The group members will have full access to read, write, and execute, but no one else will. So we're going to say chmod 770, and then we're going to say / twins. And that's it. So you're going to be like, well, what does 2 do? What 2 really does is it says, okay, if you are posting anything, if you're writing anything into this folder as a group member, the file that you create is going to be owned by the group twins in this case. So the file is going to be owned by the group as well. So if you put that 2 in, any file that we create is going to have the group ownership by whatever group that they're in. We didn't have to do that. It doesn't tell us anything. It just says Sally and Sue must have full access, but it has nothing to do with make sure the files that are created are owned by the same group as well. And we will see that further down, so I'll show you when to use the 2. But in this case, if it doesn't tell you anything about making sure that the group owns each of the files, just use your normal permissions, which is the 3 digits. If you want to have full read, write, and execute access, is 7. If you want them to have read and execute, which is what you normally want, but not write, you'll have a 5. If you just want them to have read, you'll have a 4. Okay? So in this case, once again, root has full access, read, write, and execute. The group members, Sue and Sally, have read, write, and execute, but everyone else that's not part of the group has nothing. So that's good. We just completed the whole part C section. So now we can move on to part D, and that's installing MySQL. So let's get to that. I'm just going to check one thing, and then we'll start with number 1. Okay, so it says Sally and Sue are database users, and they need the MySQL database installed and running. Install the MySQL database server. So right away, because we're installing something, you need to know that the practice lab that you need to go to find the commands you're looking for is under installing and upgrading software. So let's go to that. So we're going to get out of here. We are going to scroll up and go to installing and updating software. Go to the practice lab because that's where you're going to find the commands. And there's a lot here. But I always tell you that whenever possible, use the simplest way to install things, which is down here. It is yum. You're going to say yum, install, and the service name. And like I already told you, MySQL is something we have not installed before, but very similar to Apache, which is the web server. You can't just say install MySQL and hope that you get it. You have to know the exact command or the exact term that you have to put in. So Apache web server was HTTPD. In this case, because we've never done this before, we don't know, but he does say hint MySQL-server, so we know that the command that we're going to use is yum install MySQL-server. So that's what I'm going to do, and I know that again because in the installing and updating software, there's a section right here where it says installing software with yum, and that's the best thing that you can do because it makes sense, but it's not going to work. Not right now. If I type in yum install MySQL-server, I'm going to get an error. Not right away, but it's going to happen. So I'm going to see all this, I'm going to say yes, and it's going to say errors, can't do it, because SO1 doesn't have an internet connection. Remember, this is what students always forget. They're like, it's not working, I don't know why. Make sure your DVD ISO image that I told you about, this guy right here, is in VirtualBox and mounted in the virtual machine. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So let's clear this. What you're going to do is go to Devices, go to Optical Drives. If it's not here already, choose Disk Image, find the DVD ISO image, which is right here, and open it. And that should give us a check mark. So we have that check mark, which is good, but it's not mounted yet. Just because that check mark's there, it's not mounted. And I can see that because if I go and type DF and hit enter, I don't see that CD in there at all. So it's not it's not there. So I'm going to clear this. Actually, no, I'm not going to clear it. I'm just going to say mount /dev/CD-ROM. That's the command you're going to want to use. Hit enter, and that should be in here, by the way. Let me see, does it actually tell us? Should be somewhere in here, but that's something that you'll have to find because I don't remember off the top of my head where it is. Oh, right here. Mount the CentOS 6.6 DVD ISO at the mount point. Here's your hint. We did this operation in the file systems and disk. Okay, so it even tells you which lab you learned this in. So go to file systems and disk to find that. But I just know we've already mounted it. So now that we've mounted it, if I type the df command again, hit enter, we can see it's there. So now we should be successful in installing the service. So I'm going to hit clear and let's say yum install mysql-server, hit enter, hit yes, and now it will install. So I'm still installing and updating software at the practice lab. I just used this guy, and we've just installed the MySQL database server. So the next part says configure the MySQL database server to start automatically at boot. Hint MySQLD. So this part is not in installing and upgrading software. This is in another lab called System Startup and Services. So we're going to have to do that. We're going to have to go into that. So let's go back. Let's scroll up. Click on System Startup and Services. Go to the practice lab. And I'm going to show you the command that we need to use. Basically, right here says we have to use the check config to set the service. In this case, it says HTTPD, but we want the MySQL to start automatically at all common run levels. So this is the command we're going to use, except we're going to switch the HTTPD to MySQLD. And you're going to say, all right, well, it told us we're going to be saying MySQLD, but I'm going to show you how you can find out what you should be putting in. So let's clear this. There is a command that you learn right up here that says check config -- list. So I'm going to say check config -- list, and it's going to list every service that is on this virtual machine. And if you were looking for MySQL -server, you're going to see it's not here. It's listed alphabetically though, so you should be able to find something that says MySQL. And you're going to see that right here. And right here it says MySQLD. So that's why when we're doing the check config and we're doing the service name, we're going to be calling it MySQLD for MySQL database. And what you'll also want to know is this. Right now it says 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as off. To make sure it runs at all common run levels so it automatically starts at boot, you have to make sure that it is 0 and 1 that is off, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are on, and 6 is off. So when you run this command that we learned down here, check config the service name on, it'll actually switch it. So that 0 and 1 are off, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are on, and 6 is off. So let's try that. So let's click on here. Clear. We're going to say check config. We're going to say MySQLD on. We didn't get an error, so it's probably going to work. Check config -- list again just to confirm, and we can see MySQL is off, on now, off. So we have 0 and 1 is off, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is on, and 6 is off, so it worked. So it's perfect. So that is what we're going to have to do to complete that step, and we can now move on to the next step. This step says make sure that MySQL server is running, start it manually or reboot. So just remember that when you download a service, just because you download it doesn't mean it's going to start automatically. And just because you said check config the service is on so that it starts automatically at boot, you haven't rebooted the machine. So it's not going to automatically stay on. So you might get an error on your actual test because you haven't turned it on. So at least he's reminding you have to turn it on. So there's two ways you can do it. He says you can either reboot the machine because you know it's going to work if it automatically if it boots, it's going to automatically start. Or we can start manually. So if you're pressed for time and you don't want to wait for it to, shut down and start up again, what you can do is this. You can type in service, the service name, MySQLD, and then you can say start or restart. So in this case, because it's not even started, you can say start, but restart works as well. All that restart will do is it's going to try to stop the service. It'll give you an error and say, well, the service isn't running, so I can't stop it, but then it'll start it back up. So either way is fine, but because we know it hasn't started, you can just say start, and we'll hit enter. We'll get a lot of stuff, but it's going to say okay, okay, which means it's good to go, and we are finally done part D. Okay? So if you go to, just to remind you, if you go to your startup and services and you're looking to figure out how did I know service, that service name start, it does tell you in here, right here. This is how you can start things manually. But again, he says you can just reboot. So if you can't find it and you don't remember, just reboot the machine. It will start up automatically for you. Okay? All right, so one final thing to do. Part E, we are almost done. It says twins share everything. Sue and Sally want to share as many of their files as possible, even the files in their home directories. So the first thing it says, configure their home directory so that each has read access to the other's home directory without giving other regular users any access. You have to make sure you read this because it says read access. So you have to make sure that each other can read each other's home directories, but they can't write anything to. So that's really important. Don't just assume they have full access because you might get an error. It's going to test to make sure that it is only read access. And that's something in the first video I didn't read right away. And so I messed it up, and then I had to tell you guys, oh, no, actually change it so it's only read. So make sure you're reading it. And when it says configure their home directory so that each has read access, that means they have to read and they have to also execute. Because if they want to read a file, they're going to have the execute permission as well. So we're going to have read and execute, which is going to be a number 5. All right, so I'm going to show you what that looks like. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to want to change mod, and we want to make sure that there is read access only for everyone that is in twins, right? So you're going to say, okay, so 750, because I said the user, Sally, for example, should have access to read and write on her home directory. The group 5 will have 5 because they should be able to read and execute but not write, and no one else should have access, right? But remember, you have to change the ownership of their home directory. So we can't actually put this in because it won't work right. So what we have to do is look down here as well. It says configure their account so that by default every file they create has a group of twins. Hint, initial login group. So there's more to this than we need to start off with. So if you're reading this, make sure you read everything first, because if you just start here, you're going to do things that's going to conflict with this. So just make sure you read the whole thing so you understand exactly what we want to do. And if you read the whole thing like I just did, what we're going to see is that what we want to do is make sure, in Sally's case, Sally's home directory allows Sally to write, read, execute everything she wants to do. But every time she creates an account, or every time she creates a file, the file has to be owned by the group twins. So when she creates a file, instead of the owner being Sally and the group being Sally, because remember, Sally has her own group, right? We want to make sure that every file that she creates in her home directory has the owner Sally and the group twins. So remember I told you with the permissions, we're going to use that 2 whenever we want to make sure that the files have a group ownership of whatever group they're part of. We also have to make sure that Sally owns her own directory and groups now owns her home directory, because we want to make sure that Sue can access her home directory because she's part of groups. So this one's kind of complicated to explain, but basically what you want to do is this. Their home directories have to basically be owned by the same group that they're both in. So we're going to have to make sure their home directories are owned by the group twins. So I'm going to do that first. And remember, I learned this in the users and groups practice lab. So let's go back to users and groups. And I'm just going to go right down to groups where we learned this. To change ownership, we want to change the group from Sally to twins. So let's just look at that first. Let's just see ls -l home Sally. Okay? Or sorry, I should just do this. Home. So we have Sue and Sally. If you look, Sally's home directory is owned by Sally and the group is Sally. And if you remember when I went to the ID, you can see Sally has a group called Sally. She has her own group. Sue has the same thing as the owner of Sue, and it has the group Sue. We don't want that. We want the groups to be twins. That's what we're going to have to change first. So what we're going to do is we're going to say chown Sally colon twins and then /home/Sally. Okay, because that's what it says right here. chown, we don't have to make the directory, it's already existed, but chown, change ownership to Sally. This says root, but remember Sally's going to own her home directory. And then we're going to change the group to the group name. So we want it to be twins. We don't want it to be Sally anymore. And then we're just going to be putting the directory. In this case, it is home Sally. So we're going to hit enter, and that works. Now let's hit up. Let's change this to Sue. And changed Sally to Sue here, and hit enter. And now we're good. So if I hit ls-l home again, look at this. Sally has the ownership of Sally, and now the group ownership is twins, which means that now if I change the permissions right, Sue should have access to Sally's home directory, but no one else will because no one else is in twins. And Sue's home directory, Sally should have access to twins as well if we change the permissions. So let's do that. So let's clear this now, and let's change permissions. So right here it says chmod 2770 and then the directory. We are going to be using the 2 because remember we want to make sure all the files that are created will have the group ownership of twins, but we're not going to use 2770 because it does say that, for example, in Sally's home directory, Sue should only have read access, which means they should be able to execute and read things but not write. So we're going to say chmod 2, so all the files that are created get the group ownership of twins. 7, so Sally's capable of reading, writing, and executing. She gets full permissions. And then 5, because everyone in the group should only have read and execute permissions, not write permissions. And then 0, because everyone else that's not in the group should have no permissions at all to the home directory of Sally. And then put in the home directory of Sally, /home/Sally. And hit enter, and we're done with that. And you can do the same thing for Sue by just changing Sally to Sue. And we are finally done this whole thing. So now it works. This is exactly what we want. And I hope that wasn't too confusing. I know a lot of people are going to say, well, it says just read access, so that's all I should put. But just remember that if you want someone to read a file, for example, like think of a Word document. If you want Sue to read a file in Sally's directory that's a Word document, she can't read it. She can't open it and read it if she doesn't have execute. So a lot of times when they say read access, that means read and execute, but not write. But if you are confused, just ask your teacher. Just say, did they want read and execute or just read? But in this case, I'm confident that they want read and execute because think of a document from Word. A Word document has to be executed so you can actually see it and you can read it. You just can't write anything. You can't modify anything. So that's it. That's all you have to do for this entire thing. Remember, there are some things that you should look at that might come up that you'll want to challenge yourself with. Let's just see if there's anything I can think of. Let's go into file systems and disks. Is there anything here? No. Just trying to think if there's anything else I can give you in terms of some hints. This might be something that you may want to look at. Scheduling jobs with cron. You might want to get familiar with cron. If you do have anything to do with cron on your test, it may not be as simple as just all of these 5 stars. Each of these 5 stars represents something else. One's a minute, one's an hour, one could be a day of the week, one could be a month. So you'll want to get familiar with this. One thing I would say is if you do have something like this on your test, get familiar with what these guys are. This right here just means who's running it. Root is going to be running it. And then this here is the command that you're going to do. So what cron does, just to let you know, is it schedules things to run at a certain time. So once you complete these stars, so you figure out what they are, then you say who's going to run it. It's going to run whatever you type in here, which is kind of like a script. In this case, it's saying we're going to run the date and we're going to append it to this file right here. But you might have something completely different. You might not have it. But these are things that I would suggest you look at just because you might get something like this on the test, and you might have thought, oh, they're not going to put something as crazy as this on the test, but they might. Like I said, anything in the practice labs will definitely have the ability to be on your test. So just check things out and make sure that you are comfortable with everything. And in this case, like for example, cron, you can see your star /2, and you're going to be like, what does that mean? That means that it's going to basically change every minute. Let's see what happens. It's actually going to be every 30 seconds, I believe. I think that means like change the minute to every 30 seconds. But just Google it. Just say cron stars meaning or something like that, and see if you can find something that's going to tell you what it does. Here you go. And there you go. You have exactly what you need right here. So the stars, the first one is going to mean minute, the second one is going to mean hour, the third one is going to mean day of the month, and they give you what you can actually put in there. This star means the actual month, and this star means day of the week. So 0 to 7, you can say 0 means Sunday, and you're going to go all the way to 6, which means Saturday. So get familiar with this and just try to get yourself to a point where you're like, okay, I know this kind of stuff inside out, and that way you're fully prepared. Like I said, it may not be in your test, it could be, you never know. Anything in the practice labs will definitely have the capability of being on your test, but that's pretty much it. So what I can do is just show you really quickly what you need to do to transfer a script back and forth from W01 to S01, just so you can see how that's done, just in case you're not familiar with it, but you should be. You're just going to go up to Firefox. I'll just bring this guy down here, bring it over here, bring this guy here. Wait for Firefox to load. It can take some time, so just be prepared for that. And 0007315. What I will say is that if you get very familiar with this practice test, I think I said this in the previous video too, the practice test should be able to be completed within about 40 minutes if you're very familiar with what you're doing. I think in the previous video that I did, I actually timed it, and it was under 45 minutes that I was able to complete everything, and that was me explaining everything. If you don't have to explain, you're just doing it, you could probably do it in 25 minutes. So when you have an hour and a half to 2 hours for your test, trust me, it's a lot of time. Even with the couple things that you have to do that wasn't on your practice test, you'll find that you should be able to complete everything within an hour, which means you have a full half an hour to an hour to research things if you get stuck on anything. So don't worry about the test. The test is completely fair in my opinion. It is really well done. It's actually my favorite test out of all the tests I've done at Mohawk College, because this is one where it's basically just testing you on what you know. I don't like true and false questions. I don't like multiple choice questions or multiple selection, because those are things that sometimes you know everything inside and out, but you just don't understand the question. And that may not be that you don't know what you know. It may be just that the question is really poorly worded. Not to insult anyone that created any of the tests at Mohawk College, but I will say, actually I should go to Dropbox. I will say that when it comes to these questions, it's really hard to understand what they're looking for sometimes, and sometimes it's just nuts. You know what I mean? It's not good. I'm just going to grab any zip file. We're going to save it. We're going to click OK. And then what you can do is just minimize this for now. And you can go into Applications, System Tools, and Terminal. You can go into your Downloads folder. You can basically unzip it if you want here. Or you can unzip it on SO1 if you want. But it doesn't matter which way you unzip it. So I'll just say just unzip it here, because you already have the unzip tool in W01. In SO1 you would have to download and install the unzip tool. So make it simple for yourself. Just kill some time by saying unzip here. It unzipped it. So now we have this script. We're going to say scp host.sh, and we're going to send it to root of SO1 at 10.1.1.20 and put it in the temp folder. Hit enter, put in the password for root of SO1, which is admin pass. It sent it there. So now we can go to SO1. We can go into the temp folder. Look, we can see that we have the host script. So we're going to run it by hitting ./host.sh. Hit enter. It does all these things that's going to check for. And obviously I'm running a script that isn't actually the test script, so it's not going to be an accurate script, but I'm just showing you what you do. So once you've run that script, now what you can do is just look and find what the output looks like. It should probably look like something like this, SO1. You're going to say scp SO1 file, which is the output file, go to root at 10.1.1.10, which is the W01 machine. Put it in temp. Put in the password again, admin pass. It'll send it back. Now as ls, we can go into temp, so cd temp ls. We see that the SO1 is there, and now all you have to do is you have to upload it. So you'd go in there, and you guys know how to upload, so I won't show you that. But you can see it's really quick. W01 is hardly used for this test, so I think that in terms of this test, you should be able to do this. There should be a lot of time, so hopefully you do really well. I want you to tell me how you do, because that would be awesome. I'd like to hear how well you did and how well this video prepared you. But this isn't a video that I put out there for everyone. This isn't something you have to subscribe to. I'm not making money on this. I'm just trying to help the students that I tutor at Mohawk College and anyone else that's taking this course that wants help. So hopefully this did help you. If you do have any questions or comments or you're confused about something, let me know and I'll try to help you as much as I can before your test. But like I said, good luck, and I will see you next time. Bye, guys.